everyone. My name is Natalie Eden. I'm the CEO and co-founder with Impetus Digital. At Impetus Digital, we have built some of the best-in-class asynchronous and synchronous virtual collaboration and communication tools. We have worked with life science companies from across the globe over the past 14 years to help them with everything from virtual advisory boards, online medical education and learning events, digital investigator meetings, and since the launch of our award-winning Insight Events platform, we've also helped pharmaceutical companies with MSL and sales rep training, large corporate events, innovation hackathons, and everything in between. But more importantly at Impetus, we really believe that everything starts with a conversation. And from these big, hairy, audacious conversations with some of the leading edge thinkers, digital provocateurs, and healthcare thought leaders, we can all work together to collectively and positively disrupt healthcare. So I'm really happy to have having one of these thought leaders at the table with me today. This is actually Pam Cusick. She's actually the Senior Vice President of Rare Patient Voice. And she's also a dedicated market research professional with more than 30 years of experience. She's also a seasoned research professional with expertise in study design, implementation, and analysis, as well as having a background in public health communications and research. As Senior VP of Rare Patient Voice, Pam's focus is on the continued growth and success of her company. And she also has a very keen eye on client services, business development, as well as an oversight of outreach and panel management. She also does marketing as well as human resources. Basically, she wears all the hats. And since joining the company in 2016, Pam has been a key contributor to the company's overall growth and expansion. Throughout her career, Pam has also been a very dedicated person to the professional development of women, as well as to supporting the disability and patient caregiver communities. Welcome, Pam. So happy to have you on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So absolutely love the background and basically wearing all hats. Really excited about getting into Rare Patient Voice. But why don't you maybe start by telling us a little bit about your career trajectory and how you landed on where you are today?
Sure. So I started out as a government contractor in public health. So working on research programs for CDC, NIH, FDA, focused on effective communication and things like that. And then eventually in the 90s, I transitioned over to pharma market research. And that's where I met, or I worked for Wes, who started Rare Patient Voice, but he didn't start that until 2013. So in the mid 90s, I took a pause and went off as a contractor myself or consultant to raise my kids and then also do a little bit of consulting on the side, which was great. And then in 2013, Wes started this company and I said, hey, let me know when you need somebody. And in 2016, he did, and here I am.
Beautiful. Why don't you actually tell us a little bit, the name is really interesting, Rare Patient Voice. We all know about, patients with rare disorders, but maybe patients are rare. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what the company is, sort of the mission, the vision, and really what it is that you do in the world.
Sure. So we connect patients and caregivers with all types of research opportunities. So we started with rare patients, and by that I mean like the rare and orphan community patients where there may only be a small number diagnosed with that condition. So what we would do is go to patient events such as the National Sickle Cell Conference or National Hemophilia Conference and meet patients and caregivers and invite them to join our community. And when we have a client come to us who wants to do some research, say they need to talk to 25 hemophilia patients, we then connect them. So we're kind of like a matchmaker. We started out in market research, so we were doing, connecting patients with focus groups and interviews and online communities, and we've since expanded to include more usability and human factor studies and clinical research as well. We do also have clients who work on post-clinical studies where they're looking at patient literacy or health literacy and making sure that patients understand the clinical trial results. So really across quite a broad spectrum of research. We also included non-rare, and by non-rare I mean more chronic conditions, asthma, diabetes, for a variety of reasons. So we would go to events and let's say we were at a Crohn's and colitis walk. There might be that one patient there with Crohn's disease, supported by 10 other people with 10 other conditions, which may or may not be rare. And so we didn't, people would say, "Oh, can I sign up? I have asthma." And at first we were like, "Well, it's not rare, but sure." We weren't going to tell people that it wasn't important. And then, of course, over time, we have clients coming to us for those non-rare conditions as well. So, um, we're covering kind of a broad spectrum. We have about 100,000 patients and caregivers, more than that now. Probably, I can't even give you a count right now, but we've expanded to Europe as well. So we're in the UK, we're in the US and Canada, and then we're in Germany, France, Italy, Spain, UK, Australia, and New Zealand. So we're trying to find patients all over the world who want to have their voices be heard and participate in research. And this zebra behind me is Rarity, and zebras are the mascot of rare diseases. And so we actually had this, drawn by somebody that we know, and then we had a naming contest, and a few of the names came up, Hope and Rarity and some other unique names, and then we had a contest, and the final one was Rarity, so that's her name.
I love it. Absolutely. So cool. So let's actually take us through the step-by-step process because, there's a lot of different pieces here, but one of the key components of this is just having the database of patients. So you started off small, you're now kind of becoming this global community, if you will, of people with myriad of different conditions, diseases, et cetera. What is the process that Rare Patient Voice conducts in order to incentivize, encourage people to join into this website? And when they join, what happens to them after that?
Right. So we connect with them in a variety of ways. So as I said, one of the ways is going to events, and COVID put a little bit of a stop to that, but they're coming back. So when they sign up, we tell them all about the research and how they can contribute. And a lot of times, patients don't realize that it's what they have to say is really important. And so we share with them how they can provide input to the development of devices and products and services, and so they're really excited about that because they're the experts in what they're doing. So it's beneficial to them on the one hand to be able to participate and talk to somebody who really understands their condition. They're helping somebody who comes after them who might be diagnosed. So there are a lot of internal value for the patient. We also pay patients $100 an hour for their time. So a lot of patients say, well, I would do this just to be able to help other people, but we want to incentivize them properly, for their time, because really they are the experts. They're providing something that other people don't know. You might be a doctor trained in a specialty, but you're not living every minute with that condition. So what they can provide, the depth of knowledge that they provide is significant, and they should be rewarded for that.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like a fantastic plan. Now, one of the things that's also interesting is we start to think specifically about healthcare provider specific platforms and communities, specifically physician. There's
Mhm.
usually some sort of a verification process, license number, et cetera, and it becomes this enclosed, safe ecosystem, if you will. So I think one of the questions may be around the validity of the individuals who come in as patients or people with specific chronic or maybe not so chronic conditions. How is the system cleansed or updated or cleaned to ensure that these individuals are who they actually say they are or have the conditions that they say they have?
Great question. So there are a couple of things. So first, as I said, we go to these disease-specific events. So, that's a pretty good way of finding, if you want to go to find hemophilia patients, to go to a hemophilia conference and work with them there. But when people sign up with us, we have a very stringent process of checking different things like IP addresses and making sure that their conditions match the medications that they've recorded. If we have any questions, we will call them and verify the information. But we are trusting that the patient come to us and with what they say they have. We generally, our way of connecting with patients beyond going through the events is we work with support and advocacy groups. So some of the smaller groups, they might be a regional a regional foundation or a regional support group, and we work with them as a referral partner. So they might post a link, about Rare Patient Voice or some information, and then a unique link. And when people sign up through that link, we'll donate money back to that organization. We'll donate $10 per person who signs up, which doesn't sound like a lot of money, but for some of the foundations that we work with, they've earned over $10,000 already. So it's a nice sum for them, and it's an incentive for them to bring people from their community to us. People can sign up online, but it's most of the people who sign up with us are through advocacy groups or through the events that we go to. We are really very careful because there is a lot of fraud in research. Sadly, people do want to pretend that they have a medical condition so that they can, participate and earn money. And we're very careful about, about screening them before we allow them into the process. There's some automated tools that we have, or if they've not already been implemented, they're on their way to being implemented, which kind of stop the fraud from coming to you from like a click farm or a bot or something like that
Mhm.
before it ever hits our database. So that will be very helpful, also in the future to kind of give an extra layer. But I know our patient advocacy team spends an enormous amount of time making sure that people are who they say they are.
Beautiful. Well said. Well said. Let's actually start from the very beginning of this as people and companies are developing new innovations, biologics, small molecules, other chemical entities, or software as medical device, basically new innovations in the marketplace for health. Is they're oftentimes going through some sort of a clinical trial, through the regulations about phase 1 to phase 3 and, moving forward into phase 4. And there's a methodology involved with these clinical trials. And part of this, of course, is that the trials are being done on human beings and people need patients.
Mhm.
So tell us a little bit about how you work with manufacturers, sponsors, clinical research organizations to help with clinical trial recruitment.
So, very much in the same way that we work with all of our clients, they come to us with, with an ask. They might be looking for patients with a specific type of cancer. We'll go back to our community and see, who we have there that would match what they're looking for, and then we send the patients an invitation and we explain what they're being invited to participate in. Um, when it's a market research study, there's an incentive involved. With clinical research, it's not the same thing. They're not being paid for their time, although they may be compensated for travel and things like that. But all of the people who've signed up with us are interested in participating in research, and broadly that includes clinical research as well. So we're always, trying to find opportunities for our patients. We want them to be able to participate if they're, so inclined. So part of what I'm doing is identifying new, connections with CROs and companies doing clinical trials themselves, where we can say, okay, we have this, large community of patients with sickle cell, as an example, or some whatever's being worked on, that we can at least offer the opportunity to them.
Yeah, really, really awesome. Now, COVID-19 changed the world and in a mega way with clinical trials, so much so that it has become a synonymous word of using the word decentralized clinical trials or hybrid trials. And that has kind of turned everything in that whole market, in that whole research clinical trial world upside down, including when things are being done, they're being done at home. There's also a lot of things around electronic consent forms, patient reported outcomes, the methodology at which ambient biometrics are filtered into systems, and all of these various other elements that have changed the paradigm. What has Rare Patient Voice done to help potentiate and regulate and facilitate these decentralized and hybrid clinical trials?
So for us, it's a really good thing because, as you can imagine, rare patients are not all clustered in, Baltimore or New York City or, around a clinical site. So having decentralized trials is really great for the patients. Again, we're connecting the patients with wherever the opportunities are. And the more we can educate and share information and have more opportunities that are decentralized, where, it's better for our patients. I know that, some of the trials maybe, for one reason or another can't be decentralized. And so offering services to connect them with those sites, whether it be travel, some sort of a um, help to figure out how they can get there and manage the logistics is really important for patients. And I think that again, for the rare community, this is something that they needed a long time ago. All patients, whether you have a rare disease or you have a mobility issue that might impact whether you can get to a site, decentralizing these trials will help so much, because it's hard enough for people to actually qualify. As there's a huge funnel. We might send 1,000 patients invitations, but maybe if you're lucky, maybe one will qualify. So
Mhm.
and you can't guarantee that one person is in that location. So having the access wherever you are is so important, and it will enable trials to be more diverse. I mean, if I'm living in rural Nebraska, I don't maybe don't have the time or the ability to travel to a big city. And so this will help more to see more diversity, whether it be economic or racial or what have you. It'll help more people be able to participate, and that's really important.
And I think that just in general, in research in general, I was just curious about your philosophy or what you have actually seen with rare patient voice, how you've moved the needle on diversity, inclusion, and equity in some of the more underrepresented and underprivileged areas across the world.
So some of the, when we were going to a lot of events, so pre-COVID, we would go to, we had at one point, I think we had 200 or 300 some odd events that we went to every year, or that in that year before COVID hit. And we were going to, inner cities and all over the place, some, rural areas, more rural areas. We had people, working part-time for us all over, representatives for Rare Patient Voice, to find people where they are. So you might live in a more rural area and there's a diabetes walk, or there's another healthcare event or a health fair, and we would have someone there to try to find them and share that they can participate in research, and there are places that that we would go that maybe patients wouldn't ever have known about research if we hadn't been there. So that's one of the ways that we try to reach different audiences, and going it eventually we'll be doing the same thing in other countries. So going to events wherever they are, wherever the people are, and trying to find them. The other thing that we do, again, through our patient advocacy team, is connecting with, I think they have over 2,500 referral partners now around the world. And those people don't have to be in a city, right? They can be anywhere. They might have a small group in, rural Nebraska, and then they can help find people who would not otherwise be represented. I mean, ages ago when I was a focus group moderator, we went to 3 cities, and those are the people that we interviewed. And we got very good information, but information from a specific type of person, right?
Mhm.
But now, when we have focus groups and interviews that we're connecting patients with, they can be anywhere. And that's really helpful to give a different point of view.
Absolutely. So, so big, especially as we start talking about, algorithms and, machine learning, and we think about the intrinsic bias in that. So we really have to work really hard to make sure that these new digital opinion leaders have more of a diverse voice. So wonderful to see that's part of your MO. Now, we would be remiss not to talk about the general research that also goes on after a new chemical entity comes in the market and is being actively promoted. And before that, there's obviously some of the regulatory or market access or reimbursement issues, especially in countries, European, Canada, et cetera, that are HTA countries, health technology assessment. So they have to go through a rigorous review and looking at pricing and reimbursement and all kinds of other parameters around, the cost of the product and, the pharmacoeconomic analysis, et cetera. And part of these processes sometimes involves, the inclusion of submissions from patients, patient advocacy groups. Tell
Mhm.
us a little bit about some of the work that you get involved with your patient groups for those kinds of HTA submissions.
So, really, when people come to us, clients come to us, we don't always know exactly what the research is that they're conducting. We'll know that they're looking for, they want to do a survey with 50 MS patients, as an example, or with diabetes patients. And we get those specifications from them and connect them with the patients to do the research. So in terms of our involvement with those things, we may have patients who've participated in those sorts of kind of submitting what their thoughts are and submitting where they might have an impact. But again, we don't always know exactly who that end client is, which is kind of interesting. Sometimes we do. Very often our internal client is usually a research company. So they're facilitating the research for an end client who might be a technology company or a pharma company or what have you. And so we really know who they want to talk to, and we can target very specifically in our community those people for them. But when it comes to what they're talking to them about, we don't have access to that information, which is interesting in a lot of ways. For the patients, they don't usually get results back, right? They don't know what comes of the information that they're providing for a variety of reasons. It might be a regulatory process. It might be some sort of a marketing program for a pharma company. And so what we try to do is get patients, we'll do several internal studies each year so that we can share the information back with patients because they want to be able to
Hmm.
sorts of things they're involved in. But to answer your question, I don't really know if there are specific HTA programs that we have connected with. It very may well have happened, but we're not usually involved in that level, at
Yeah.
that point where we know what's been discussed.
Interesting. For probably would be interesting to do a survey with the people who actually have used your services to see what the variety of things that you could share that as a syndicated report.
Mhm.
Another thought is really around the various companies, pharmaceutical, medical device, other life science companies, et cetera, software companies,
Mhm.
and wanting to do evaluations, but using real world evidence. So utilizing individuals for that purpose. The other, and there's a myriad of other things as well too, is putting people into patient communities or advisory boards and that sort of thing. So if somebody approaches Rare Patient Voice and they ask for like really specific information, I was curious about what the process is. If you're saying you're kind of hands off for that, are they just basically paying per filtered person, or they're asking, I need X number of people with this in this geographical area, please send this out, and then once they actually agree, then they can contact them directly to be part of an advisory board, or how does it actually work?
So there are a variety of different ways it can work, but really the way that you put it, so someone will come to us and say, they're doing let's say it could be a pharma company that wants to do an advisory board, and so they want to work with patients for a year, and here are the kinds of patients they want to talk to. And so we would go out, we'd get those specifications. Our team would then, assign a project manager who would then invite these different patients, explain exactly what they're participating in. And then, it would move once we recruited all the patients that they were looking for, we would then connect them with that end client. Sometimes it's a little different than that. So it might be a survey. And so maybe we need to send something out to 1,000 patients, with a particular, let's say it's mobility issues. So people who use wheelchairs and walkers and so on. So the project manager would, be assign that project and again get the specs, figure out exactly who the client's looking for. Maybe it's only in the US or maybe it's only in Canada. And so they'll target that specific area and then send those invitations out. The data bounces to the client, and then they get redirected to us so we can pay them. So it works in a variety of different ways, but really it's us connecting the client with the people that they want to talk to, and that's really what we're our focus is.
So there's probably a whole slew of upstream pieces to this. One of them is the connecting. There's probably also a screener to
Mhm.
see if it fits certain things. There's a payment, etc. I was actually just curious at which point does the patient, I don't know, not that you want to look at anybody as being a property or whatever, but when you're just looking at an IP or a person, or at what point does that company now have an ability to contact them directly with their email address and what have you? Do you have details and logistics and regulations around that?
Right. So we're very protective of our patients. They've signed up with us and trust that we're going to do the right thing and connect them with people who are going to be, legit. So as part of our agreement with clients, they're not meant to contact them beyond the limits of this one study that
Hmm.
they've commissioned with us.
Right.
We've had cases where, somebody by mistake reaches back out to a patient, and interestingly, they'll contact us and say, "Who's this person who's reaching out to me? They're not from
Hmm.
Rare Patient Voice." And then, of course, we'll address it. But most often they're not connecting with them beyond the confines of this one project.
Right.
Um, and part of that is just making sure that we're honoring our commitment to the patients. They've provided us with very sensitive information, right? Their
Yeah.
disease, the medications, and so on, and we want to make sure that we're protecting that. And so we always have clients sign, a confidentiality or a PII agreement, and making sure that, if we are sharing, let's say they have to do interviews, we do have to share, the patient's name and their email address for confirmations and so on. So they have that information, but they're meant to destroy it once the study's done.
Absolutely. I was also just curious about this whole thing around digital, tech savviness, digital literacy, the equity around broadband and Wi-Fi and access. We talked a little bit about diversity and inclusion, but where does this all sit in today's terms? Is everybody having equal access to becoming a digital opinion leader, or somebody who is tapped in with so many other inequities around just basic things like infrastructure and bandwidth?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So, in some areas of this country or around the world, they might not have access to the internet or as fast internet speed as they might need. We have had patients who've gone to the library actually
Mhm.
in specific areas to access that, much like students who, haven't had, during COVID, who had trouble with schools because they didn't have, either Wi-Fi at all in their homes, or fast enough Wi-Fi, so they would go to some of these hubs. And I know that some patients do that, to provide access. Sometimes the interviews, let's say it's a qualitative study, it might be on the phone, but a lot of times, it's a face to face. They want to, do it on the web. So they're very resourceful. They want to be involved, so they usually find a way to make that happen. The other thing is, if they can't, let's say they don't have access to a vehicle to get themselves to the library, they might choose not to participate in that study, which is, again, that's a loss of some diversity of opinion, right? Because they may have a different point of view than other people. But by and large, we've seen people be pretty creative about how they can access, digital programs so that they can participate.
You mentioned that you are spreading out globally, and I'm assuming, there's obviously geographical time barriers and even language barriers. I was curious about what the future is with Rare Patient Voice around non-English speaking surveys, events, advisory boards. Kind of what is the plan of action there?
Sure. So, we're trying to be very deliberate about how we grow, because, again, back to where we were talking about fraud, we don't want, a whole bunch of people in other countries signing up and not being the patients that they say they are. So we have to work really hard at that, and we're trying to do that very thoughtfully and carefully. Right now, we have some project managers who have other language skills, right, in the countries where we are now. So they might be able to speak German and help with that. But eventually, as we grow, we may need people on the ground to be able to answer questions. Patients, contact us. They might call and say, "When was my interview?" And if they're calling you in Italian and you don't speak Italian, it's a real problem. So we have to be kind of ahead of that and make sure that, we have people in place who can help with those other languages. And so, in right now, we've just expanded to 4 other countries that are not English speaking, and patients don't want to be they want to be spoken to in their own language. They may, a lot of them speak English, but they don't want their emails to come to them in English. They don't want the interview to be in English. So we need to, now we're not doing the interview, so our clients would handle that part of it, but we do want to make sure that for the recruiting and screening part of things, we want to make sure that we have people in place to be able to handle that. So if we were to expand, say, to Japan, we've been asked a couple of times, like, can you go to Asia because we really need patients there? It's a big area, or South America. We want to make sure that we have people who can communicate with the patients, and not just, send them something in English and hope that they can translate it.
Yeah, absolutely. The world is really advancing in technology, and we hear about all kinds of technologies, including blockchain. We sort of use it synonymously with data security and ownership, especially around trust obstacles, et cetera. And as we start to think about the future, right now, your main selling piece is the individual, for their individually sharing their data from a person to person.
Sure.
But I was also just curious about, with all these concepts of ambient biometrics and the push of wearables and this information that can get put into databases, is this a potential for rare patient voice, where it's more patient data that's accumulated into a database? And from there, the question of utilization of technologies like blockchain, so that patients in fact own their data and potentially could tokenize it, so they could one day monetize who's using this data. What are some of the thinking potentially of what the future looks like here?
So interesting, really, really interesting concept. There are a lot of companies out there that are, they approach us. They have great, systems and programs to keep, patient data together, and so patients, can have all of their records in one place. And other companies that really want to do what you said, which is, allow patients to monetize their data. Um, and the one thing that we have, seen across a lot of those companies, they have great concepts and very interesting things, but they don't have patience, which is fascinating. So the data that that you can get from a patient medical record is fascinating and can create a very, very unique and interesting journey. And I think that we have some clients, that with patient consent, we can connect the patient's data that they provide us with their medical records. So you might find a very unique journey. I think there'll still always be a place for the patient voice, because their data tells one very large and interesting story, but it does not capture it's kind of the emotion of every day, and the kind of what they experience. You don't see that in the medical record. So I still think, that even with this, so many advances in technology and so much to look at, we're still always going to need the patient voice. And as far as monetizing their data, I'm all for it. We're paying them for their time and their effort, and I think everybody should. I don't think that their data should come free. There's a lot that goes on with passive listening. So in social networks, right, you have people that join together, and then you throw out a question, and then see what they have to say about it. I prefer to ask patients what they think about things, and how they react to a concept, or really, a really good moderator talks to patients and understands, really understands their situation, and kind of matching that with their data, I think, is very, very powerful. But
100%. And I completely agree. I think it's going to be very interesting, however, Pam, with the continuous advancement of technology. We hear a lot about this idea of the digital twin. The more
Mhm.
data that we put into the internet/metaverse, the more likely we're creating mathematical models of ourselves. And so we get into predictive analytics about what somebody is going to anticipate that they're going to say or do about something. So it'll be
Mhm.
very interesting. So my last question really has to do with a community in rare patient voice. Is there a place for people of like conditions to be able to communicate amidst themselves? And do you see there being a place one day where people in your community will crowdsource a clinical trial or a market research study for something that they care about and think is important for themselves?
Fascinating. I don't really know. I think it's, I think patients are becoming more and more empowered, and through their advocacy contacts and advocacy groups, the idea that you have more control than you originally thought you did, is very powerful. And so if I know, for some of the parents, for example, that I know and I've met, they're very passionate about finding a cure for their child or finding a treatment. And so they they're they'll start a community, they'll build a registry, and they will find a company to try to work on a cure for them. So I can see that happening within Rare Patient Voice. We do not have a mechanism for them to communicate with each other, because that's just we set up to connect them with other research opportunities and not do that. Now we have a Facebook page that they can contribute to and share their ideas, but we're not putting out content and then having them kind of talk amongst themselves. It's been a thought that's been tossed around from time to time, but I think what makes us unique is we are doing this one thing really well, which is
Yeah.
finding the patients and connecting them with all kinds of research. And to diversify that would be a whole nother, kind of another part of the company, which I'm not opposed to doing. I just know that they can do that elsewhere.
Yep.
And, so we are kind of keeping it, keeping a clean, this is what we do and how we do it. But I'm all, I think the power of the patient and the power of the patient voice is, growing, and an amazing thing to see what some of these families are doing. And so, we always want to provide them with opportunities. So if there's, if people are choosing to want to try to crowdsource something, and it's something that we can share with them and they can get on board and do it themselves, I'm happy to have them do those things.
I think that the future is limitless. However, I do agree with you. What you have as a database is gigantic and huge, and there's a huge barrier to entry to what you're doing. So keep on doing the fabulous job. It is certainly going to be incredibly useful, as so many companies and entities out there are really moving into the whole patient centricity mindset, which they should be. It's wonderful about what you provide. For anybody who's interested in contacting Pam, partnering, associating, collaborating, or utilizing their services, please look for her contact details in the show notes below. If you enjoy this conversation, I encourage you also to check out impetusdigital.com. These are the kinds of conversations that we have between pharmaceutical companies and physicians, patients, allied healthcare providers, and payers. We interact through a series of synchronous and asynchronous touch points over the course of time for us to come up with new plans, protocols for trials, how we're going to utilize rare patient voice for a trial that they're doing, and moving those agenda forward, ideas forward. And it's very efficient and very cost effective. Please check out impetusdigital.com. We'd really appreciate if you can like and subscribe to our channel. And please also share some feedback on iTunes. We'd really appreciate it. Thank you for everybody who attended today. And thank you as well, Pam, for a fascinating conversation.
Thank you so much. It was great.